At the end of all these world crises, human injustice, the mistreatment of the voiceless, is our final tributary in a river of crisis. Desperation and corruption give way to horrific acts of violence and exploitation for the sake of survival. The Church is called to be present in the midst of this darkness.
Human injustice is such a broad and general term. I mean, it reaches very far and wide, both locally and globally, and a lot of people have tried to define what is injustice. And I think Lynn would agree with me, our favorite definition is by a guy named Gary Haugen, and he says that it's whenever power is being misused to take from the weak, namely their God-given rights, the fruits of their labor, their life, their dignity, their liberty. It's basically the strong using force and deceit to take from the weak. So when you look at the definition in that light, pretty much every topic of human injustice, and we'll go over some of those later, they all have that specific definition in common, whether it's a local issue or a global issue. Strong taking advantage of the weak.
Like Samuel said, it encompasses a wide range of injustice sort of topics, from child abuse to human trafficking to refugees, female genital mutilation. There is always a crisis when there's children involved. They are the most vulnerable of anyone in the world when it comes to human injustice. So that could be child abuse locally or just child sex trafficking globally. Both happen all over the world.
If you're looking at other crises that are being covered in this small group curriculum, there's so many horrible spiritual side effects that come across when you have a girl that's being conditioned and the normal part of her life is to be sexually abused or raped day in and day out. That affects somebody spiritually. They're never going to be the same without the right trauma care and aftercare, assuming and hoping that one day they're rescued. A lot of cultures even will impose their spiritual beliefs or their cultural beliefs to make some of these injustices seem normal, like FGM, for example. That's a huge side effect. How they view God because of their experiences, especially when that's what they're being told to believe because of their experiences, that can become a very intricate, complicated issue that is going to take a lot of healing and care to undo some of those thwarted, messed up spiritual beliefs.
They estimate that there's 30 million people trapped in slavery around the world. That's men, women, and children. Then they also estimate that there's 150 million children living on the streets, from 1-year-old up to 18 years old, that are vulnerable, that have no one taking care of them, just living on the streets in the poorest countries of the world. That's 5 times more than are trafficked.
A story that we refer to a lot, and you could put different names, places, and faces into the story, but one that we refer to a lot is, let's talk about the soil erosion issues in Haiti and the poor soil quality and how that's affecting tree farmers, fruit farmers. One farmer specifically, let's say he each year is realizing his fruit trees are suffering more and more, and he's downsizing and downscaling the amount of fruit he's able to produce because of the poor soil quality. Eventually he gets down to his last tree and he realizes that it's not going to produce fruit anymore, and so he can chop it down, make carbon out of it, sell that carbon, or he can potentially, let's say he can get some more fruit out of it. Maybe he can keep that one tree alive, and that's an option. Or his desperation, his most logical solution is to sell his oldest daughter into the sex trade, because that's going to be a renewable source of income. Whereas selling that tree, chopping it down, is going to cut off his last bit of income that he has hope of making to feed his family. So it's this idea that desperate people make really desperate decisions. Now, that's not always the case with injustice. A lot of time it's the abuse of power, but sometimes it is people in really desperate situations facing these other crises, and they have to do something that normally they wouldn't do, normally they would not want to do. But these crises have forced them to make a decision. And that's what poverty is. It's not the lack of stuff, it's not the lack of money. True poverty is the lack of options. You have no more options. You do something pretty desperate.
Well, I think it goes back to the beginning in Genesis when God created the world. He created this beautiful world for us, and he said, "Here, I love you, take care of it." And we messed it up, and we continue to mess it up. And it's his heart that we look at each other as he looks at us, that we are created in God's image, and everyone on this planet is also created in God's image. And so that creates a responsibility and a desire for us to help others.
The Bible is a story of justice and redemption and reconciliation. It is. It's like a reckoning of that which was made low to be exalted to the right hand of God once again in that rightful place, that place of restoration. So that is something beginning to end. We see a theme, a thread of justice. Jesus, as he's inaugurating his ministry, he opens the scroll in Luke 4 and he quotes Isaiah 61, and he's telling the assembly, this is my mission, to do the works of justice. So the very first statement out of Jesus himself before beginning his ministry is one saying, I've been sent here to do works of justice for those who have been oppressed, those who have been brokenhearted and imprisoned and need liberty.
So there is always this initial gut reaction that a perpetrator or someone who is being the bad guy towards someone else is the bad guy, and I want to do him in, and I want to do bad things to him because he's doing bad things to, say, children. And really, God has a heart for that person as well. If we look at maybe their history or things that have been perpetrated against them, God has a heart for them as well. And that's a big leap to try to make, but it needs to happen. I think we get busy in our day-to-day lives here in America especially. There's a lot of distraction that keeps us from seeing what's going on around the world. I know there was for me for years. I was unaware because I suppose I chose to be unaware. I liked the simple, easy life. And when I did become aware, my heart was broken. And I think it's as simple as seeing what God's put in front of you today. Seeing that person walking past you, or as you walk past someone who's homeless. Just doing what you can in that moment. Even if it's just a smiling at a child, that can change their life. I know locally we had a gal get out of prison a few years back, and I brought this to the attention of our students, and a group of students took her under their wing and began to help her get to all of her appointments and get to take care of her children and try to get her life back together. And it took a large group of people to do that, and it took a long time. But a couple of the students felt like they needed to take one of her children under their household while she had to go back and do some time. And in the process of that, they love that child. They purchased a home where when she got out of prison, she could live upstairs with her children and learn what life is like in the real world versus the world she grew up in, living on the streets as a little girl. So they continue to house her and help her, and they have taken justice to another level where they are doing it with their lives, with their family. She's incorporated into all that they do. And I think that's an amazing thing. So I discovered, kind of by accident, this whole injustice field. I didn't like anything nasty or stressful or anything. Little House on the Prairie is where I live. And I was at a conference one time, and they were showing their work in Africa, and I was just taken back by what they were doing in Africa, these poor starving little children. Well, God supernaturally imposed the face of my little granddaughter over that. And I kiss her face 100 times a day, love her. And Jesus said, there's no one kissing their faces. And I was just devastated that why are they any different than she is? And how could it be that children are out there by themselves and being abused and all of the horrific things that can happen to a child that's lost? And so I came back and I began studying the issues of children in crisis, not wanting to, but feeling kind of compelled to. And after about 6 months of that, it was a very hard time. About 6 months later, God gave me this strategy for people need to know this. Like, how could I have gone most of my life without knowing this? People gotta know this. And so we, at that point, started looking at developing this school, this training school, to get people the information they need and train them in how to make a difference and what are options to go out and help these children, help people who have no choice, who have no voice. And so we have the Love Justice School where people can come and get equipped to be able to go do that. And a big share of that is personal soul care. You can wallow in these horrific stories, and it's not healthy. And so a lot of our training is back to soul care. What's Jesus want to heal in us so that we can be more effective in helping others?
Like we said in the beginning, this is such a broad topic. There are so many issues that it can almost be like, where do I even begin? What I would recommend doing, depending on where you're called, if you're called locally to your community or you feel like God's calling you abroad to the mission field, sit down and brainstorm every issue of human injustice that you think might be taking place in that community, and then pray about, is there one certain issue that God's calling me to? Because we can't tackle all these at the same time. And then I would say, look at one of these three approaches. That's prevention, intervention, and restoration. And any worker of injustice is going to be called to one or more of those things, typically one of those approaches. Prevention being awareness, education, trying to get laws passed. Intervention meaning actually being the person to intervene in the crisis and rescue those, and that could look like a lot of different things. And restoration, bringing people back to the family of God, bringing their soul back to a place of health, restoring them. And just about everybody has a calling inside of them. One of those three approaches will resonate with them. We've seen it through the school and through our training down in Nicaragua. There's always one that's highlighted. And then go back to that brainstorm list of injustice issues and see how you might engage in that issue with one of those approaches. And lastly, if somebody's already doing it, partner with them. Don't reinvent the wheel. And if it's not being done, seek God and see how might He be calling me to start something.